Hello and welcome everyone to today's Association for Manufacturing Excellence webinar titled, So You've Done Lean, but Quality is Still an Issue? 5 Proven Solutions. I'm Jerry Strohmeyer, the Education and Training Program Coordinator for AME, and I will be your moderator. Our presenter today is Ann C. Graham, Managing Director of the legendary Value Institute. Ann likes nothing better than to walk the shop floor catching people doing something right as she looks for opportunities to improve operations. She's an international speaker and the #1 best-selling author of Profit in Plain Sight. And for many years, she served on the board of the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters Association and has over 25 years of experience in the manufacturing sector, both in the trenches and in executive roles, including over 10 years as a turnaround expert working in very diverse industries, from the Fortune 500 to small and mid-sized companies. One of her clients credits Ann with having shown him the holy grail of profitability. Before we start, just a couple of housekeeping items. You will be in listen-only mode throughout the webinar. You will see that you are muted on your attendee panel on the right side of your screen. If you have any questions during the webinar, please type them into your question area in the attendee panel and click on Submit. We'll review the questions at the end of today's presentation and answer as many as we can. When you log off today, please check your email inbox, and it will be an invitation and link to fill out a short webinar attendee survey. Please take a few minutes to complete the survey today, as your feedback is very important to us to improve future webinars. Ann has also graciously agreed to provide a PDF of today's presentation. We will be sending that along with a recorded link for a webinar replay to each of you next week. Now I am pleased to introduce Ann C. Graham, who will present, So You've Done Lean, but Quality is Still an Issue? 5 Proven Solutions. Take it away, Ann.
Thanks very much, Jerry. It's really a pleasure to be sharing this webinar content with all of you today, because I spent over 25 years working with companies who are very, very focused on Lean, Six Sigma, TQM, all the other quality initiatives that we've seen come and stay and some go over those 25 years. And yet what I'm hearing consistently is that they are still dealing with quality issues, and their customer service departments are getting busier and busier all the time. And that puts a whole lot of unnecessary cost into your operations. So if this sounds familiar, it's time to get all that ooey gooey sludge out of your systems. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, with 5 practical, proven strategies that you can use to get that sludge out. I'm going to teach you all of those and more. Now, there was a really interesting Twitter thread this week about the semantics of we've done lean versus doing lean and versus being lean. So I want to tell you where the title of the presentation, So You've Done Lean, but Quality is Still an Issue, actually came from. It's come from the organizations that I've worked with who have really invested heavily in lean and are continuing to deploy lean practices and working really hard to be lean, and who use that language all that time about we've done lean, but just because they're frustrated. They're feeling like they've done all the right things. So I want to let you know I completely appreciate and totally support the idea that this is about being lean as a way of doing business. And there's no intent here to suggest that you do lean once and you're done with it. Obviously, this is an ongoing process, and there is no defined start or stop ever. So in the early days of my career in the manufacturing sector, I didn't have a really clear roadmap in terms of prioritizing what to do. But I always instinctively tried to find ways to take care of customers and deliver more than what they expected, and yet still do it in a way that was very efficient, very effective from an operational perspective. And that was sort of a baby step to what I eventually uncovered. Over the years, I took on a lot of really tough turnarounds, and I found myself buried constantly as a senior executive in the fallout of customer issues every time. Now, I did succeed more often than not, but in one case, one of those turnarounds, I got so mired in the internal issues that I completely forgot and missed out on what I'm going to teach you today. And I can tell you, I actually consider that to be the greatest failure of my career. Now, maybe you don't think of yourself as customer-facing. Perhaps you are purely on the operational side of the business. And I want to just let you know that if you're primarily internally focused, rest assured you are going to find this completely relevant for what you're doing. So if you've been focused on conventional quality, then it's time to take a little bit of a different look in terms of how are you actually going to get that sludge out because there's good news and bad news. And the bad news is that what you're doing in Lean today isn't really meant to uncover or tackle the real causes of some hidden waste and unnecessary costs in the way that we're going to expose them today. And as a result, you're missing out on a really critical element that lowers costs and delivers competitive advantage, which is really what Lean is designed to do at the end of the day. Now, the good news is that this is a little bit different thinking. So you're going to get some things that you probably haven't been exposed to in the past. And let's get us started here with digging in deep on some of this. The research shows that there are just 5 categories of costs and issues that account for 80% of the unnecessary costs in your business today. So we're going to focus on doing a deep dive into those 5 categories of costs. Now, companies have 2 alternatives with this whole process. They can either keep band-aiding the issues that are showing up throughout their organization and keep incurring those costs over and over and over again. And I have to admit that is often what I see with the organizations I work with. No matter how good they are at doing Lean, usually that walk through the shop floor always finds areas that they are still band-aiding. And I'm going to share a couple of really colorful case studies with you today in terms of exactly what I see when I'm doing that. So that's one alternative, is to just keep band-aiding. The other way is to tackle them in the way that I'm going to teach you today and really just eliminate those costs for good. Now, the reason there's a picture of a bicycle here with a flywheel is that when you eliminate those costs for good, the result is very similar to the flywheel on a bike. And if you're familiar with flywheels, you'll know that that basically is a mechanism for storing energy, so that even when you take your foot off the pedals, you're still getting energy and momentum from that stored energy in the flywheels. So when you get all of this sludge out of your business with the 5 different ways that I want you to look at cost today that shouldn't be there, and you actually solve those problems for good instead of band-aiding them, you're actually really going to have that flywheel effect going on in your business. You're going to continue to see the results of the work that you've done. You're going to continue to see those cost savings over and over and over again. So you're going to be able to focus your time and your attention on activities that are actually of much higher value. Now, the case study I'm going to be sharing is around a $40 million company. They eliminated over $4 million of sludge in about 30 days. And that was just the tip of the iceberg for them. A little bit later in the presentation, I'll tell you that full story as I illustrate exactly how this can work for you. So right now, I just want to take a quick look at what we're going to cover today. By the end of today, you're going to have new knowledge and skills in 3 very specific areas. You're going to be able to develop a gold standard reputation for quality by focusing on this hidden side of quality that Lean doesn't cover, rather than simply doing the conventional product quality tactics. That's going to provide a huge leap forward in your business in terms of profitability, customer loyalty, and competitive advantage. Because true quality is not just about product quality. You know, just like Academy Award winners who make us laugh and make us cry or scare the daylights out of us versus, you know, kind of run-of-the-mill actors, the companies who really deliver a great customer experience through end-to-end quality are the ones who become the gold standard. And that's what we're aiming for here. What's encouraging is that you really don't need to be absolutely perfect to be that gold standard in terms of eliminating these unnecessary costs to serve. There are some incredibly complex quality models, customer satisfaction models, a lot of things out there that have such rigorous standards that you're almost always going to fail. With the 5 simple approaches I'm going to teach you today, you're going to set yourself up for success. So in the limited amount of time that we have today, I'm going to promise to create as many ahas as I can, and then I promise to show you how to get some additional support in terms of taking this to a next step and actually making sure that you're seeing all of the benefits that you can as a result of going through these 5 steps. So let's talk about this idea of sludge. You know, what you're looking at here is the workings of a very expensive watch. And you might have noticed that you don't see an awful lot of sludge in the typical watch. Why is that? Well, it's a sealed system. It's not exposed. Your business, unfortunately, is not a sealed system. It's exposed to everyday issues, things that change in your environment, things change in the economy. It's exposed to human error. It's exposed to systems error. Every business is an imperfect system, no matter how lean you are. So getting the sludge out is a really systematic approach to getting every area of your business working like clockwork. And here's what's interesting, is that all of the things I'm going to share with you today that are creating waste in these hidden areas and creating costs that shouldn't be there, they are all self-inflicted wounds. They're all within your ability to identify and eliminate. However, most businesses just never take the time to do this. So this 5-step obliterate operational sludge system that we're going to talk about really helps you identify and eliminate the areas where you're exposed to those self-inflicted wounds. So the research has shown that just 5 categories of issues cause 80% of the system-wide issues. I've mentioned that before. I just want to reinforce that. It's 5 categories of issues causing 80% of the costs that are in your system that shouldn't be there. And that means both on the shop floor and beyond the shop floor. So getting them right the first time can have tremendous impact in terms of the costs that are in your system. So let me talk about what I mean about on and beyond the shop floor. You're going to actually hear me use the words internal customer and external customer today. And this system is designed to capture the sludge that goes on in both areas. So I want you to really put your own lens on this, depending on your role within your organization. If you are primarily internally focused, what I really want you to do is use this in the context of your internal customers. In other words, those are employees who are actually working with output produced by another employee as the final product is created. This works really beautifully in the context of looking at your customers as being internal customers, employees who are actually receiving the output of other employees and having to work with that in order to drive finished goods. Now, if your focus encompasses a broader view of employees and external customers who use your product, then I want you to put your lens on this in terms of both contexts. I want you to look at this from the perspective of internal and external customers, because they are going to be able to tell you in the blink of an eye where your sludge is hidden when you actually take the time to listen to both of those groups, both of those audiences. And I want you to imagine the impact on your business of eliminating all of those unnecessary costs, all of that wasted effort and time. You know, being able to redeploy some of the people on your shop floor into higher value add work. Being able to redeploy your customer service team, who in many cases are fixing, and band-aiding, and put them into value add roles instead. And I want you to think about what happens if you got a lot of the sludge out of the way. You're going to end up having customers and employees who really can't quite put their finger on what it is that's so different about your company, why they love working with you. And there's a huge competitive advantage that you experience as a result. Competitive advantage in terms of being able to hire and keep the best employees. Competitive advantage in terms of being able to have customers who don't want to do business with any of your competitors. So what we're going to do, you see the little diagram here, there's 5 different areas. What I'm going to do is step you through each of these 5 areas next, and I'm going to teach you sort of some real quick and dirty ways to make some progress, which will get you started. And then I'll outline all the other ways that you're going to want to drill down over time. So let's go back to this sludge and why it matters. You know, just driving your car around town eventually builds up sludge, and you need to change the oil. Your business, on and beyond the shop floor, has the same problem. Every interaction between employees, every interaction with your products moving through your assembly line, if that's the case, or in a job shop environment, every interaction with a customer, an external customer, has that same potential to build up sludge. It doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. Again, when you're driving your vehicle around town, you're not doing anything wrong to end up with that dirty oil. It's just the way things go. So we've talked about simply band-aiding the problem and moving on to the next, versus the idea of dealing with the root cause and eliminating that problem. It's just like the band-aiding is like continuing to drive without getting that oil change. You know, sooner or later, you're going to have a much more serious problem. If all you ever do is top that oil up and never do give it a change, it's going to be a world of hurt. So you have to get in the habit of preventive maintenance in your business, not the kind of preventive maintenance you're doing on your equipment and machinery right now, but the kind of preventive maintenance that keeps the sludge out of your systems. And that's why there's more to quality than just lean, because so much of that sludge is actually hidden. Now, I'm sure many of you remember watching the movie The Perfect Storm. Let me take you through this case study and let me show you step by step what each of these 5 areas are and how you can actually get results from our call today, which will enable you to go and take action and start to get the sludge out of your own system. This was an organization, $40 million manufacturing organization. As I mentioned, they are the 3rd largest kitchen cabinet manufacturer privately held in North America. They're putting a lot of work through their system, both in a job shop and in an assembly line format. And they ran into a situation where they found themselves in the perfect storm. They had a renowned reputation for quality, they had tremendously loyal customers, and they had invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in building out a lean operation, and they've got KPIs coming out their ears. They are living lean on a day in, day out basis. But they hit their perfect storm, and that's why I just want to suggest to you it can happen to even the best of organizations. They had some key staff turnover, and they brought in a really gung-ho new chief operations officer who was really highly experienced, and the CEO had actually worked with him before, but he ended up being a total disaster. He started making an awful lot of changes on the shop floor, including throwing out a lot of the quality initiatives that had worked successfully in the past and replacing them with his way of doing business. I don't know if any of you have ever been in that situation before, but again, I'm sure if you have, you've got a little bit of a grimace on your face as we speak here. Now, staff experienced all of the usual change management challenges. They were confused, they were resistant to what he was trying to do, and as the problems continued to get worse, they finally ended up pretty demoralized, and they started seeing a lot of turnover. Now, this is an organization that works in a small rural environment. It is not easy for them to attract and keep great employees. So one of the things that can be so powerful about getting this sludge out of the system is your employees really do want to work there. Now, at the same time, the post-recession economy started to pick up. Construction in the US and Canada started to pick up again, and their sales went through the roof because people were once again buying new kitchens or renovating old kitchens. And that put pressure on the plant to produce at levels that they had easily achieved in the past, but that they had not been working at those levels for a year or two during the recession when sales were down. Now, the resulting perfect storm of high volumes and productivity breakdowns because of everything the new operations officer was doing became an absolute disaster for them. Now, before they knew it, they were experiencing a huge spike in defects, huge cost of scrap, a lot of late orders causing sales and customers to light up the customer service lines with repeated calls wondering where their order was. And as you can imagine, when you've got new construction where you've got a kitchen going in, it has to be there at a certain time. If you start messing around with your customers in terms of how they are able to actually complete some new homeowner's dream, you've got a really big unhappy customer base. And that's what they ended up with doing. Because their deliveries went from about 4 to 6 weeks to as much as 12 weeks. And it was usually by surprise to the customer. It created a huge work in process bulge that made them have to rent additional warehouse space for all of the incomplete orders. So all of these quality issues piling up, taking up that extra warehouse space, delaying their customers, phone lines lighting up. I think you've got the picture on this one. So what happened there is the entire management and quality team got completely consumed, basically trying to band-aid these problems because it was a mess that had caught them by surprise. And being an organization that was really concerned about their customers, they basically said, all right, how do we just fix this? How do we just get more of these orders out the door, out the door, out the door? And what they started also messing with was their entire order entry process that triggered all of their just-in-time materials, because they tried to start dynamically moving orders around to get them out the door sooner. It just became one heck of a mess. So, they thought they'd had the Swiss watch. At one point, they were a really well-run organization. And just with all of this that caught them by surprise, the filthy engine that was underneath, all that gunk, all that sludge, really became obvious. So they hired more lean consultants, and they tried to get back to some of the ways of doing business that they'd had in the past. They developed a whole lot of standard operating procedures, as I mentioned, incredibly detailed key performance indicators, KPIs, that help them monitor their business, but nothing changed for the better. And they tried to re-engage their people, but again, nothing changed. They kept losing good workers and then having to go through a whole training process of bringing new people on board, and as a result, quality continued to suffer. At one point, they went from a short-term team that had about 4 people on it who were busy fixing all of the defects and trying to push them out the door, to a team of 18 people in that fixing department. That's out of a total staff of 300. I think right now you can get a very vivid picture of the amount of cost and waste and just mayhem that's going on with all of that. So this staff of 18 people were also doing a lot of overtime, trying to increase production, trying to get caught up. Huge, huge unnecessary costs that didn't need to be there. So what did they do about this? Well, this was a very simple system. We kind of implemented this initially on just kind of an emergency basis to stop the bleeding. This is the system that eliminated the $4 million of defects within 30 days. Now, when they got complacent and went back to not changing the oil, the problems did reappear. And over time, they had to get more strategic and actually make this 5-step process a way of doing business. So now, instead of reactively trying to solve every issue with this rework and this band-aiding approach, they're taking the time to really zero in on the core issues that needed intense focus. They're solving them for good. They're rebuilding their customer relationships. They're seeing their employee turnover basically stop. And they're seeing millions of dollars of positive impact on their bottom line. The very first step of this 5 steps is to look at reliability. And reliability is simply doing what you promised to do. In their case, it was delivering the orders on time as promised. So anytime you have something like late or missed deadlines or uncertainty because you haven't taken the trouble to close the loop, those are just unanswered questions that are going to end up building in sludge into your business. And I can tell you that the research shows us here that probably about 50% of the traffic coming into your customer service lines is caused by not delivering on what you promised. That's completely within your control to address. You remember I talked about self-inflicted wounds. Absolutely, this is a self-inflicted wound. So the reliability in this case was causing all of this, repeated phone calls into customer service to say, where's our order, where's our order? And that led to all these schedulers who were trying to start juggling the orders to get the most critical out first, which had a huge domino effect in terms of how they were doing their ordering for their materials, their just-in-time ordering. It also ended up with, half-finished jobs kind of all over the plant and all over the warehouse. It was just madness and mayhem. They were trying to increase production throughput, but once again, they were putting huge unnecessary costs into the system and an awful lot of burnout into the employees. The second piece here is assurance. And just like Pinocchio, assurance really is what we feel in terms of that sense of confidence and competence that's expressed by the person we're dealing with. If you've ever been on a phone call as a customer calling one of your own suppliers, and you've known that they were just kind of giving you the gears, that means there was an assurance issue. You just weren't feeling confident in what you were being told. And, if a laser eye surgeon confessed that you were their first patient, how long would you stay in the chair? It's anytime there's a lot of uncertainty, what's going to happen is that issues are going to get escalated. Whether it's internal issues where an employee says, hey, there's a problem here, and they're not getting the right answer from their supervisor, guess what? They're going to sit there and start trying to escalate that issue, or they're going to be grumbling in the background in the lunchroom. It just doesn't go away when they have an assurance problem. Same thing with customers, external customers. If you've got an external customer who doesn't get the right answer, guaranteed they're going to phone back and say, let me speak to somebody different. So again, you're building all kinds of extra cost into your situation. In the case of this cabinet manufacturer, this chief operations officer that they had hired was extremely charming, and he was full of, don't worry, I've got this, it's under control. He was full of a lot of platitudes and empty promises. But, over the year that he was there until he finally got terminated, things continued to go from bad to worse. And it wasn't long before he had the Pinocchio reputation that he was just lying through his teeth because he didn't have a clue what he was going to be doing next. And he completely lost the confidence of the rest of the senior team. And that had an impact not only on the internal side, those internal customers who were actually his team working for him, but it also had an impact on the external customers, because one day, one of the dealers who provides these kitchen cabinets to the end user customer called the day before placing an order to make sure that the delivery timeline that they had been promised would still be honored. And of course, they were told, yes, according to our best information, we're now at a 6-week cycle. They placed the order, and the next day, the plant got back to them and said, you're now at 10 weeks. Now, you can imagine that she went through the roof. Basically said, how can you tell me one thing one day, and the next day, it's not only just a different answer, but it's almost twice as long as what you'd promised me in the first place. She just had no sense of assurance that the information she was getting was correct, and as a result, she started taking her orders to a different kitchen cabinet manufacturer. I'm sure that if you were the customer, you would do the same thing. So a lot of the customers really continued to verbally express their loyalty when the CEO was talking to them, but at the end of the day, they lost a lot of business to the competition. That's what happens with assurance. A small thing completely within your control to fix and address. So let's move on here in terms of the tangibles. I want you to just get a vivid image in your mind. Imagine going to your favorite restaurant and finding filthy bathrooms. Doesn't that kind of make you wonder what's going on in the kitchen? So it's the same thing here. All kinds of subtle cues. If you're sitting there on an airline and your TV screen doesn't work, don't you kind of wonder what's happening with the maintenance in other areas? So every time you do something from a tangible aspect that the customer can see or touch or visualize, that is what a tangible is. So it's damaged packaging, which makes them wonder if the product itself is damaged. They're going to be much more rigorous if they're scrutinizing a damaged packaging and pulling the product out of there than if the package has arrived perfectly. Things that are incorrect invoices, incomplete orders, so there's something missing. That was one of the things that this kitchen cabinet manufacturer started to have happen, is that they were shipping out doors and things that were missing hardware. Well, you can imagine again what that does when you've got an installer on site who's supposed to be building out that kitchen, and for the lack of a hinge or a knob or something else that should have been there, that installer now has to come back another day. Guess who the installer wants to make sure picks up that bill? It's the company, of course. So tangibles in this case included everything from scratches on finished cabinets to really poor paint finishes, to the missing hardware that I mentioned, to the actual cabinet itself being out of true. In other words, they were not 90-degree corners. Imagine an installer trying to install that. It doesn't work. Mismatched color between door to door and poorly matched grains. You can imagine what that would look like in a kitchen. Again, remember, this is an organization who has invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in lean and is trying to run a very lean operation, and all hell is breaking loose. They had a lot of faulty product, as you can see here, piling up at the end of the production line. This is all stuff that can't go anywhere because there's a problem with it. No order could go out until it was complete, which meant that the entire area of the factory was turned over to storing incomplete orders. So inventory costs went sky high, adding to the confusion. Now I've got to tell you that tangibles, again, those kinds of things are entirely within your control. You simply don't ship out orders with missing parts and scratches and dents and bangs and bad colors and you name it. They had an incredible quality assurance process. They had supervisors at every step of the way. The entire process was breaking down because of the sludge. And that's what they were going back and band-aiding over and over and over again. Now, I'll tell you a little bit about what they did with some of those tangibles. You'll be amazed at how they got the sludge out. But let me keep going through the model here right now. And this is about empathy. Again, this is soft, squishy stuff in some cases, you might think, but it's remarkably powerful in terms of the impact it has on your employees, or, quote, your internal customers, as well as your external customers. Because if at any point someone doesn't feel that they are being heard, someone doesn't feel that they're being valued, again, whether that's an internal customer / employee or an external customer, it triggers a lot of emotions. So whether you've got somebody who comes, to your organization happy or sad or frustrated or so on, they simply think you don't care. And that tends to magnify any negative emotions they're experiencing. Again, whether it's an employee who feels disrespected by a supervisor and goes back and grumbles and doesn't get much work done for the rest of the day, or whether it's an external customer who basically feels dismissed when they bring a problem to the company's, customer service group. They feel dismissed, and as a result, they decide to take their business elsewhere in the future. They vote with their wallet. That's also when they get really demanding with regards to discounts or compensation when things have gone wrong. I mean, every customer, every employee knows that things will go wrong eventually. As long as they are treated in an empathetic way, they don't get bent out of shape about that. It's only when the empathy is missing. And guess what? It's within our control, isn't it? In terms of whether or not we demonstrate empathy or whether or not we're kind of uncaring and dismissive whenever we're dealing with these kinds of issues. Now, to this day, this kitchen cabinet manufacturer is absolutely renowned for its customer service staff. Customers are constantly saying, we just love your customer service staff. They're always so helpful. However, what happened as they were going through this horrible perfect storm is that they lost a couple of their most senior people simply due to burnout. These people just got tired of band-aiding the problems over and over and over again, trying to make excuses to customers, trying to let them know that they cared, but there was nothing that they could do. So you really want to make sure that you're not creating that level of burnout on the internal side of things just by not making sure that you've got enough empathy on the go to make it work. The final piece of this is around responsiveness. And responsiveness is really different from reliability, but in very subtle ways. Very subtle ways. Reliability is when your voicemail message indicates that you're going to return calls in 1 hour, and you either do it or you don't. Responsiveness has more to do with standards and expectations. In other words, customers don't usually expect the phone to be answered on the first ring. They're delighted when it is, but they don't expect to wait until the next day or the next week to receive a reply to an urgent email. Even if you've never explicitly promised that you'll return all emails within a day, there's an expectation there these days that says, yeah, that's what's reasonable. So when we fall down on responsiveness, customers get really a lot more aggressive. They keep phoning customer service lines again, they send repeated emails, or in this day and age, they go on social media and they say something uncomplimentary, hoping that somebody in the company is monitoring those channels, and that then enables them to start escalating their concerns to higher levels. So the barrage of communication from them is exhausting, it's time-consuming, and it simply adds confusion and cost into the whole mix of trying to deal with them. Now, once again, responsiveness, who's in control of that one? Each and every one of us is in control of whether or not we respond in a reasonable time, or whether we sort of, pull our heads into our turtle shell in the case of a perfect storm and kind of hope this whole thing is going to go away. It doesn't. So the kitchen cabinet manufacturer really struggled with responsiveness because a lot of the staff turnover left them shorthanded, but in their case, it did not become a major issue. So you've now got the 5 different elements. But your big takeaway here, I want to really reinforce this. All of this is you shooting yourself in the foot. These are all self-inflicted wounds. They are all within your control to actually deal with. And if you're already using a lot of lean principles in your organization, you're going to know how to deal with these once you surface them. So how do you actually surface? Which are the ones that we go and chase down first? Which are the ones that are the biggest problem? Here's how. You actually start to listen in on what's going on with your internal customers, in other words, where the gripes are, and you also start to listen in to your customers, just even in terms of what are the most frequent complaints we get on our customer service hotline. Those are 2 things that you can walk away with today from this webinar that are going to help you figure out which are the biggest issue. So I'm going to be sharing a little bit more with you in terms of this case study, in terms of which of the issues they actually found to be most critical and how they actually dealt with them, but I just want to reinforce something that Jerry mentioned. You know, we are covering a lot today, and it's not always easy to make changes. So I'm at the very end of this session, we are going to be doing a Q&A session, and if you want to start typing in your Q&As right here and now, that would be great. Or I guess you get to type in the questions, I'll give you the answers later. But I also know that we're probably not going to get to all the questions today. So at the very end of this session, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to give you kind of a private email just for people that are on and listening to this webinar, where you can reach out to me if you wish with any questions that you may have. And I'm even happy to get on the phone with you, have a quick conversation to say, okay, how do we help this apply to your own organization? Because my commitment to you as a result of this webinar that I really want to see you accelerate your results. I call myself a Profit and Growth Accelerator, and this is all about helping you get there faster. All right, so stay tuned for the end of that when I give you that. So the piece that I want to go to next is I just want to give you a very clear sense of differentiation in terms of the conventional approach to lean, which is really focusing on the quality of the product, and the 5 areas that I just talked to you about, which are really focusing on the quality of the experience. It's the quality of the experience for the internal customer in terms of how many times when I was describing what was going on there in terms of missing hardware, bad paint finishes, scratches, you name it, how many times do you think that some employee picked up what the employee further downstream had done and sort of looked at it and said, this is no good? But at the same time, that COO was very focused on saying, get the job out on time. So a lot of times they just kind of closed their eyes to it and let the job go, even knowing that it was not perfect. Pretty scary, actually, because when you think about kind of the impact that has, it's something that weighs you down over time. You know that you're not putting out good quality work, and in this case, these people are craftsmen, craftspeople, and to let bad product get out of the plant was something that was wearing them down. For your internal people, there is a quality there of their work experience that starts to cause turnover. Think about the quality of the experience for the end user, the external customer, whether it's the installer or whether it's the person who's walking in hoping to see their dream kitchen and instead they see a mess. Those are quality issues every bit as much in terms of that experience side of things as those scratches are in the door. It's the quality of the experience on the internal side and the external side. So we're going to shift gears a little bit here because we've sort of gone deep on those 5 different areas. I've taken you through the 5-step plan for obliterating your operational sludge. But we've still only really covered the tip of the iceberg because, as you can see, the quality of the product, the quality experience are 2 totally different things. So when we talk about reliability and we talk about assurance, we talk about empathy, we talk about responsiveness, we're actually resolving both sides of the quality equation. The actual product quality, which is often just that tangibles piece, and we did talk tangibles in that 5-step model I gave you, and the quality of the experience. It's both sides of the quality equation that matter. So let me take you through one more deep dive here in terms of how this $40 million manufacturing firm stripped the $4 million of sludge out of their system in 30 days and where they've gone since with this 5-step process, okay? So I mentioned to you that the first step is really kind of listening to what your external customers are complaining about and what your internal customers are complaining about. All you need to do is look at those 5 categories of issues and start to categorize what you're hearing. In this particular case, this organization identified only 3 of the 5 as being priority. They were reliability, in other words, doing what they'd said they would do, meeting those delivery dates. They were assurance in terms of the confidence that they were imparting both to their internal customers, their team of employees, as well as external customers, and tangibles. All those things with the paint colors and scratches and missing hardware. So reliability, assurance, and tangibles were the things that surfaced immediately when they started to listen to what their employees were saying were the issues and what their customers were saying were the issues. So it was relatively easy. I mean, you just poll your customer service reps and figure out what's going on a regular basis. You know, if it's late deliveries, lead times, damaged goods received, all of that becomes very obvious. So what we did on the tangible side, I'm going to take you there first because, again, this sort of speaks to conventional lean and where sometimes things can still go wrong. we actually went out and we walked the plant, and we looked at the area at the very end, just before the warehouse, where they called the area their sick cabinets area. These were the cabinets that had something wrong with them. They're sick cabinets. And what we did is we got out a bunch of colored Post-it notes. Pretty simple stuff. And if it was a scratch, it got a yellow. If it was a bad paint finish, it got a blue. If there was missing hardware, it got pink. We just basically wallpapered each of these different cabinets with the right color to show what kind of issue was going on here. What emerged is that the biggest color of Post-it notes related to scratches. I then went through and trained the team in root cause analysis using the 5 whys, and you're probably already very familiar with that. This particular team, for whatever reason, was not familiar with that. That was like they just seen something completely new and different. But we went through the 5 whys to say, why are we getting these scratches? And we traced it right back to finding out that when the cabinets first came out of the paint shed, they were being placed on metal shelves that had carpet over them so that the cabinets wouldn't be scratched. Guess what? The carpet was worn out on some of those metal shelves, and that was causing huge, huge unnecessary costs and delays with all of those scratched cabinets. Now again, this is a company who'd spent $300,000 on lean consultants, but for some reason, that process that they went through never went back into actually looking at the steps in the process and uncovering this particular issue. And clearly, the employees knew. They knew that the carpet was missing. They knew that there was a potential for scratches. But with the new COO, they had been repeatedly shut down when they tried to identify that issue. That's what the gunk and sludge looks like. So what they basically did, you can imagine, for about less than $100, they replaced all of the carpet on those metal shelves, and they eliminated all of those scratched items. Now again, many of those scratches, they had 2 options with those scratched cabinets. One was, in some cases, the scratches were so bad, they had to junk the cabinet and start over. So you can imagine the cost not only of the raw material, but the fact that this cabinet had gone all the way through to the finishing stage meant that there were a huge number of man hours being wasted. Somebody had to rework that cabinet all over again. And it meant that that job couldn't ship until that one particular door or that one particular side of the cabinet got completely remanufactured. That's where all that extra warehouse space came in. In some cases, though, they did try and sort of buff it out or resand, refinish, repaint, whatever they needed to do. And that's where that team of 18 people came in, fixing all of this. In other words, what they did wasn't lean. They didn't actually go back to where the problem originally started. They just said, oh, we've got to get this door out. Okay, let's fix it. So let's not go back and do any root cause. Let's actually just see if we can drive this thing through and get it on the truck and get it out of here. So you can see, again, the huge cost of having 18 people, in a fixing area of the plant, just dealing with things like scratches that could be solved by something as easy as a little bit of extra carpet. So we're not still too sure how that whole thing got missed in their lean process, but it did. But that's the beauty of this framework, is that when you actually look at what you're hearing from your internal customers and your external customers, use something as simple as the Post-it note approach to really figure out, okay, where's our biggest area of concern right now? How can we prioritize this? And then you go back and take a root cause approach. All of a sudden, you're going to stop band-aiding, and your issues are going to get resolved in a hurry. So that's how they dealt with their tangible issues. But there was still an awful lot of sludge going on in their business. And I love this quote by Bill Gates in terms of, your customers being the best source of learning. And once again, put your hat up, put your lens on in terms of internal customer or external customer as you look at this one in terms of where you deal more closely. But as this particular organization dialogued with their customers and their dealers, it became really clear that they were still able to leverage an incredible reputation for quality that they built, because they built it on responsiveness and empathy. But they also got a huge wake-up call to another self-inflicted wound that absolutely no effort around lean ever would have spotted. And that is that the CEO and the sole shareholder had determined that one of their competitive advantages would be always maintaining a 4 to 6 week delivery window. And as such, they sent out a weekly memo to all their dealers specifying exactly what the current lead time was, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks. But as the plant went into free fall, the weekly memos not only showed lead times as long as 12 weeks, as I mentioned earlier, but sometimes the lead memo said one thing and then the reality was different once the order got placed. Listening to their external customers really was the solution to this particular issue, because it turns out that their external customers, their dealers, wanted something else. They actually told the company that they could actually work with longer lead times as long as they had a higher level of certainty as to what that was going to be. What this company was doing by trying to still have their 4 to 6 week lead times, even when the plant was in free fall, is they were putting huge stresses into the system, into their own system, to try and manufacture at that level. But they were also putting in huge and unnecessary stress into the customer system. The customer said, we can deal with 8 weeks. Just tell us it's going to be 8 weeks and stick to it. We can work with that. What we can't work with is this bouncing all over the place. So as soon as they said, oh, okay, we can work with 8 weeks, that not only took the stress off the external customers, the dealers, but it also took a huge amount of stress off the plant. They were actually able to sort of pause, step back, regroup, and say, okay, now we can start getting a little more strategic about getting to the root cause of all these issues rather than trying to band-aid them. So that voice of the customer saying, wait a minute, you're trying to give us something we don't even want. Let's do something that we do want. Again, is something that a lean approach may never ever surface, because it has nothing to do with manufacturing efficiencies or throughput or any of those things. It had to do with the voice of the customer. So there's a big, big, big takeaway message here, and that is, unless you bring your customers into the loop with something that I call a value creation conversation, where you're looking to say, okay, Mr. Customer, what is it that you value? You know, what do we need to do differently to be a better partner to you? That will surface all kinds of opportunities for you to be able to get sludge out of your system. Now, it's a very structured approach. It's not a sales call. It's not a meet and greet. It's not the kinds of things you might be doing now. But it's truly giving your customers more of what they do want and less of what's unimportant. It surfaces all of their biggest dissatisfiers, and again, you can use that simple little prioritization technique to figure out where in those 5 categories it fits and what to tackle first. So that's a little beyond the scope of what I can teach you today in terms of that questioning and that conversation process, but it's the most powerful form of getting out a lot of sludge. Okay? So when we look at, following this sort of conventional approach to lean, looking at finding some of those tangible issues, finding how to deal with the root cause, getting those scratches, getting those missing hardware, all those different things that they found out of there. When you then look at, okay, what are the other complaints that we're hearing? Okay, it's around reliability. Let's go tackle the root cause of reliability, which is they were guessing what delivery time their customers wanted. They had to go and ask and find out before that went away. At that point, they also solved the assurance issue, because they were able to have their customer service people speaking with confidence about the fact that it would now be an 8-week cycle, period. There was no more guesswork. There was no more good intention. There was no more Pinocchio nose that the customer service people were sort of having to lie and then hoping they could sort of fix it in the background. All of those 3 issues were resolved very, very quickly, and that's what took the $4 million of unnecessary cost out of their business in less than 30 days. You can see how very powerful this is. So the step 3 that I want to give you is stop band-aiding and deal with the root cause. I've mentioned that a little bit in the past, but when we look at what was going on with this customer experience side of the quality equation, getting beyond the scratches, looking at this customer experience, it was a disaster from end to end, because everyone was fixing, trying to get these orders out and so on, no light at the end of the tunnel. So making sure that they got away from doing that and took that root cause approach that is such a core element of lean and taking it into areas beyond the shop floor was really their key in terms of getting out of the band-aiding and actually dealing with that root cause. Now, they still have some longer-term fixes that are being implemented, but at this point in that organization, the delivery times are back on track, and the hours per cabinet, which is one of their key performance indicators, are trending in the right direction. So they've gotten away from their perfect storm. They've gotten out of the mess that they've been in. But I can tell you this has been almost a 2-year process. And it wasn't resolved until we actually went through and did the exercise with these 5 different areas, and all of a sudden the solution started popping out of here. So you want to get your sludge out of the entire customer experience, and I'm very briefly going to take you through a process for doing that. You really just have to help your customers do what they're trying to do more quickly and easily. And again, that applies to internal customer, the next person on the assembly line or the shop floor, helping them do what they need to do more quickly and easily by giving them good product to work with in the first place, or again, helping your external customers do what it is they need to do. Because it does take more than an amazing product to gain customer loyalty and referrals and repeat business. So these experiences don't just start and stop when the product, when the kitchen is installed. It's that whole process of chasing. And the process I use is something called a value chain. And you've probably looked at that in the past. I'm going to show you what this particular organization's value chain looks like and encourage you to do something called staple yourself to the experience. Okay, I'm not going to go through this in any level of detail. But this is what the organization's value chain looked like. And by the way, one of their beautiful kitchen cabinet kitchens, from the time that a customer first becomes aware of them in the find and compare note to when they're actually a happy customer enjoying their new kitchen. Your value stream takes a similar approach on the internal customer side. So one of the things that we did here is we actually worked through every step of this customer experience to streamline and get the sludge out beyond the shop floor on the customer experience side of things. So we actually engaged a number of people. If you look at this very middle section right here, in terms of where we're looking at crafting it, that was where we started to really try and figure out what was at the root cause of all of these other issues that were going on in terms of poor quality in the plant. And they had internally developed something that they called "Care Like It Was Yours" as their slogan. And what was interesting is we kind of went, okay, so why don't these craftsmen and craftswomen, craftspeople, seem to care about the quality of the product? What has gone awry here? Well, you remember I mentioned that this is a small rural organization. It turns out that a lot of these folks are actually living in war-era housing with painted plywood kitchens. When they looked at a kitchen that wasn't quite perfect, they kind of went, yeah, it's good enough for me. It's way better than what I have in my own household now. That's one of the reasons why they were letting a lot of quality issues go through. So they actually updated that to this "proud to have my name on it." And by appealing to pride instead in this particular area of the customer experience, they were actually able to get that turnaround. It was a really subtle distinction, but it made all the difference in terms of giving them a sense of pride in creating cabinets that were perfect, that were beautiful. So unless you really understand this staple yourself to the experience component, you're still at the tip of the iceberg. So I just want to really reinforce here that your customers can't not have an experience, again, internal customers or external. Your only choice is whether it is good or bland or bad. And one of the best things you can do, as this organization did, was to come up with a really empowering customer experience statement and make sure that they could use that. So here's where we've been today. We've been down the path of learning about 5 different areas. We've talked about eliminating a lot of these unnecessary costs to serve that are really self-inflicted wounds, and then looking at your 5 next steps to increase competitive advantage by really using these 5 different areas to become the gold standard for quality in your industry. Because as long as you're stuck in the maze of just band-aiding and fixing on a day-in, day-out basis, there's no clarity, there's no way to move beyond just trying every alternative when you're in that perfect storm and trying to get results and not seeing results. So I want you to be able to use what you've learned today to really get up above the maze. Take a much more strategic view of your business. Use these 5 steps and be able to really then start to drill down on where are we working with just the quality of our product from a tangibles perspective, a conventional lean approach, and where can we be really looking at the quality of the experience at every step, internal and external customers, and start to close that. So at this point, really your next steps, just small steps to start. Just focus in on 1 or 2 of the key issues that you want to make sure get addressed. You don't have to do it all at one time. There's not a gargantuan effort here. There's a lot of incredible opportunities waiting for you with this system over time, but just start somewhere. Okay. Then, as you get more deeply into this, you'll want to experiment with things like your value curve or the value chain, which I just touched on today. You'll want to get much more deeply into the customer experience statement, which again, I just briefly touched on today, just to give you a sense of how this can end up being embedded in your overall culture. And that's essentially where we're trying to go. Just as lean gets embedded in your culture in a way of doing business, getting the sludge out using the tools that I've given you needs to get embedded in your culture as a way to really improve your efficiencies and eliminate costs that lean will never spot. So I hope this has been helpful to you. Now, let's go into a couple things. I've got a couple of quick little gifts for you, by the way. First of all, I've been asked by the good folks at AME if I would extend a little speaker discount that they've given me because I'm going to be speaking at the event in Dallas. If you are thinking of going to AME Dallas and you have not yet registered, what you want to do is you want to register before March 15th and use the code DallasGraham. That's going to get you $100 off your registration. So if you're thinking about it, now's the time. Okay, just go to ame.org/Dallas, put in the code DallasGraham, and you'll get $100 off. That's a little speaker discount that they extended to me, and I'm now extending that to you. The other thing I mentioned I would do is give you sort of a private little email approach from me as a result of our session today. And you've got the email down here. I'm going to leave this up on the screen as we go into our Q&A session. And basically, if you do have questions from today, or if you would like to schedule some one-on-one phone time just to explore how you want to be able to use this in your own business, I am happy to gift that to you, because as a big fan of AME and someone who volunteers extensively with the organization, I just want to make sure that you get great value out of this webinar in whatever way we need to do that. Okay, so Jerry, can you take it away with any questions we may have been getting through the session?
Sure, great. And I know we're a little bit short on time, so thank you, Ann. And now we will review any questions. So if you do have any questions, please submit them on the right side of your screen. And the first question is, how do you think this applies to a custom ETO shop?
Yes, okay. So when you're doing custom work, a lot of the work that's being done in that kitchen cabinet manufacturer is very high-end custom kitchens. These are not, they do have a low-end line where they're just basically stamping them out, but most of the work that they do, and in that picture that you saw, very customized work. And I think it applies every bit as much to a custom ETO shop as it does to more of an assembly line process, because you're still going to be able to look at each of those items and be able to say, okay, what's going on here? Have we got a tangible issue? Have we got a reliability issue? Have we got some kind of an assurance issue? Use the same process and you will find that it works extremely well for you.
Okay, and our next question is, how can I make sure we're not just band-aiding? How will we know that we are actually solving the problem for good?
Okay. Well, if you are familiar with the 5 whys process, that is the place to go next on that one, is that you can take action to fix it in the moment, or you can use your 5 whys to keep going down the why path until you finally find out that, that why was there a scratch? Well, there's a metal shelf there. Well, why did the metal shelf scratch it? Well, because it's supposed to have carpet on it and it doesn't. Okay, why was the carpet, not fixed? Well, because we asked it for it to be escalated and it didn't happen, so now we need to go back at this again. You can go through your 5 whys, and when you know that you've actually found out, for example, that you've got freshly painted or freshly finished wood sitting on raw metal, you probably know you've got your root cause there. And that means that you go back and you fix that root cause. You fix the raw metal with carpet, and therefore you eliminate the cause of the scratches altogether. So use that same kind of visual, if you will, in your own business. Not knowing what your business is, it's hard for me to give you a specific answer beyond sort of repeating that example. But you'll know when you're actually seeing the problems eliminated for good, that you've actually got your root cause. If you find that you're still scurrying and scrambling in the moment, you are still in band-aiding mode. And that's where you need to pause, take that step back and say, why did this problem happen? And keep going through your 5 whys, whether it's 3 whys or 7 whys, go through your 5 whys until you actually get to that root cause, and then take steps to fix it.
Okay, great. Well, we're kind of out of time, so thank you for all your questions, and thank you, Ann, for a very insightful presentation.
If you do have a question you didn't get answered, by all means, use that email. Thanks, Jerry.
Sure, no problem. No problem. This brings our webinar to a close. Our next scheduled webinar will be on Friday, April 8th, titled Lean Management, Lean Leadership, and Leader Standard Work with David Mann. Please visit AME.org under the AME Events and Training tab for more information and to register. Please don't forget to fill out the short survey that will be in your inbox. And thank you everyone for attending, and have a productive day.